Ethan Parker's mornings always started the same way, a steaming cup of black coffee in a chipped ceramic mug, the logo of Catalyst Innovations barely visible through years of wear. He liked it that way. The mug reminded him how far they'd come, he and Ryan. 10 years ago, they were just two overambitious grad students with a half-baked idea and an unused office in a crumbling co-working space on the edge of downtown Austin. Now, Catalyst Innovations had a sleek open-concept headquarters overlooking Lady Bird Lake, with 50 employees, millions in venture funding, and a brand that tech magazines called the next big disruptor. But Ethan never felt as if he'd outgrown that cracked mug. He was still the same person, restless, hopeful, occasionally terrified that it could all slip away. He believed that humility kept him sharp. He believed in the story they'd told investors so many times, that real success was built on trust, loyalty, and a willingness to put your heart on the line. He took a sip of coffee and scrolled through the morning emails. A gentle murmur drifted through the glass wall of his office as the team gathered in the conference room. From where he sat, he could see Ryan standing at the front of the room, gesturing with that familiar ease, his hands cutting the air in crisp, confident movements, his voice carrying that low, magnetic tone that made people believe in him. Ryan Carter was everything Ethan wasn't: polished, charming, effortlessly persuasive. That was why they made such a good team. Ethan was the architect, the strategist, the detail-obsessed workhorse who could sit for 12 hours straight refining a pitch deck or writing code until his eyes blurred. Ryan was the face, the force of nature that opened doors Ethan didn't even know existed. It hadn't always been that way. In the early years, they'd both been hustlers, packing boxes themselves, handling customer service calls at midnight, living on ramen and caffeine. But as Catalyst grew, Ryan stepped naturally into the role of the visionary CEO, while Ethan settled into the background, content to build and refine. Ethan closed the email tab and watched as Ryan finished his remarks. The team clapped politely, some of them glancing at their phones. A few minutes later, Ryan poked his head into Ethan's office, grinning. "Hey, man, you coming to the all-hands?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Figured I'd let you have the spotlight." Ryan chuckled.
Come on.
"You know they love hearing from you." But Ethan knew that wasn't true. They respected him, sure. But they loved Ryan, the way he could make even the worst setbacks feel like an exciting detour. Ethan had never minded. He didn't need the adoration. He needed results. "I'll stop by in a bit," Ethan said, tapping the stack of contracts on his desk. "I have to review the licensing agreement." Ryan's smile faltered for half a second, just long enough for Ethan to wonder if he'd imagined it. "Suit yourself," Ryan said, then disappeared down the hall. Ethan frowned. Something about that smile. Or maybe it was nothing. They were both exhausted. Fundraising had been brutal this time, more scrutiny, more competition. And Ryan had been distracted lately, disappearing for long lunches he waved off as investor meetings, fielding phone calls he didn't explain. But Ethan didn't want to be paranoid. If he had learned anything over the years, it was that trust was the foundation. If you didn't have that, you had nothing. He turned back to the licensing agreement, trying to shake off the uneasy prickle at the base of his neck. When he finally emerged into the main workspace, the all-hands was wrapping up. Employees drifted back to their desks in twos and threes, clutching branded water bottles and fresh notebooks. As Ethan moved through the room, he nodded greetings. Some of the newer hires looked intimidated by him. He'd never master Ryan's talent for effortless camaraderie. But the veterans smiled and gave him little waves. He'd built this culture carefully, open, transparent, no corporate bullshit. He wanted everyone to feel ownership. That was the point. As he passed the kitchenette, Mia Alvarez, their operations manager, gave him a sympathetic look. "Everything okay, Ethan? You seem tense." "Just a lot on my mind," he said. She hesitated. "Ryan mentioned he might be making some big changes. He said you'd fill us in when you were ready." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "Changes?" he repeated, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Yeah, like maybe restructuring some teams?"
He didn't really explain.
"I thought maybe you knew." Ethan managed a smile he didn't feel. "We'll talk soon." "Thanks, Mia." When she walked away, He gripped the edge of the counter, the stainless steel cool beneath his fingertips. He hadn't heard a word about restructuring. But maybe Ryan had just been thinking out loud. Maybe he was testing ideas before bringing them to the table. They'd always brainstormed that way, half-formed plans, crazy ideas, 100 possibilities before landing on something real. Still, the feeling was back, a little stronger now. Like the air pressure had shifted, and he was the only one who noticed the coming storm. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his apartment overlooking the city skyline, the pale blue light of his laptop flickering across the ceiling. He pulled up the last 3 months of financial statements again. He'd reviewed them already, twice, but something compelled him to look again. He scrolled line by line, cross-checking numbers. At first, everything looked normal. Then he saw it, a payment labeled consulting fees, Horizon Strategy Group. A name he'd never heard, for an amount large enough to make his pulse quicken. He copied the line item, opened a new browser tab, and typed the name. Horizon Strategy Group had no website, no LinkedIn profile, nothing. He checked the routing number on the payment. The bank was local, but the address was a P.O. box. He sat back, heart thudding. Maybe Ryan knew what it was. Maybe it was a legitimate expense. But if so, why hadn't he mentioned it? He closed the laptop, but the darkness seemed alive with questions. The next morning, Ethan forced himself into his usual routine.
Coffee.
Emails. A run along the river trail to clear his mind. But nothing helped. The question had lodged itself like a splinter beneath his skin. In the office, Ryan was already there, sitting on the edge of Ethan's desk, phone in hand. "Morning," Ryan said lightly, but his eyes flicked to the laptop bag at Ethan's side. "Morning," Ethan replied. "Got a minute?" "Sure." Ryan pocketed the phone. "What's up?" Ethan gestured to the door. "Maybe we should talk privately." Ryan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "All right." They stepped into the small conference room they'd used in the early days, the one with the battered whiteboard and the folding chairs. Ethan closed the door behind them. "I was reviewing the statements," Ethan said carefully. "I noticed a payment to Horizon Strategy Group." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Just a flicker, but enough." "It's a consulting firm," Ryan said evenly. "For what?" "Strategy," Ryan said. "You know, market positioning, growth analysis." "Without mentioning it to me?" Ryan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ethan, you've been buried in product for months. Someone had to keep the business side moving. I didn't think every line item needed your sign-off." Ethan swallowed. "It's a lot of money." "I know. But if we land the Series C, it'll be worth it." He wanted to believe that. He really did. But the tension in Ryan's voice told a different story. Over the next few days, Ethan tried to push the doubts aside. He told himself that trust meant giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. But he couldn't ignore the growing sense that something fundamental had shifted. Employees started whispering when he walked past. He caught Ryan in hushed conversations that ended the moment Ethan approached. The sense of belonging that had defined Catalyst Innovations was evaporating, replaced by a cold, transactional air. And through it all, Ethan felt himself standing on the threshold of a truth he wasn't ready to face, that the company he'd poured his life into, and the friend he'd trusted with everything, might be slipping away, one hidden decision at a time. For the next week, Ethan lived in a kind of suspended reality. He went through the motions, meetings, code reviews, investor calls, but every moment was shadowed by the suspicion that everything was built on lies. It felt almost like an out-of-body experience, watching himself sit across from Ryan in the conference room, listening to him pitch new initiatives, while a voice in his head whispered that none of this was real anymore. The Friday morning executive meeting was the first time Ethan allowed his doubts to fully surface in front of others. Ryan sat at the head of the long walnut table, flanked by Mia Alvarez and Derek Kim, the finance lead. Ethan watched as Ryan projected a set of slides titled Phase 2 Restructuring Proposal. "Over the past quarter," Ryan began, his tone smooth and reassuring, "we've identified several inefficiencies that have slowed our growth trajectory. If we're going to secure Series C funding, we need to present a leaner, more focused organizational model." Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. He hadn't seen this presentation. He hadn't even heard the phrase Phase 2. He raised a hand. Ryan, can you clarify when we discuss this? I'm not familiar with some of these recommendations. Ryan didn't look at him. He clicked to the next slide. We've had several conversations about the need to reallocate resources, Ethan. No, Ethan said quietly, we haven't. A ripple of discomfort moved around the table. Mia glanced at Derek, who looked down at his notes. Ryan sighed, finally meeting Ethan's gaze. Look, I know you're protective of what we've built, but you've been buried in product development. I've been managing the strategic relationships. Ethan folded his arms. And these strategic relationships involve laying off a third of our staff. Some redundancies are inevitable. Ryan's tone turned clipped. If we don't tighten up, we risk losing everything. Or, Ethan said evenly, you've made promises to investors that you didn't share with me. No one spoke. The silence stretched, brittle and unbearable. Let's table this for now, Ryan finally said. He stood up, gathering his laptop. We'll follow up offline. Ethan watched him leave the room, a hollow pit opening in his chest. Mia shifted uneasily. Ethan, is everything okay between you two? He didn't answer, because the truth was he didn't know. That night, Ethan stayed in the office long after everyone else left. The building was silent except for the hum of the HVAC and the occasional groan of the old elevator cables. He sat alone in the conference room, the glass walls reflecting his own exhausted face back at him. He had always believed that if you worked hard enough, if you were honest enough, things would work out. That belief had sustained him through the hardest nights of Catalyst's early years, when they'd been weeks from insolvency. But sitting here now, he felt like a fool. How long had Ryan been making decisions behind his back? How many consulting fees and strategic partnerships were just cover for something else? He opened his laptop and pulled up the payment records again. The line item to Horizon Strategy Group hadn't been the only anomaly. A string of other payments, smaller but consistent, had gone to an LLC called Altura Consulting. The invoices were vague: market research, business development, advisory services. The addresses were all mail drops. When he tried to call the listed phone number, it rang twice and disconnected. At midnight, Ethan finally closed the laptop and sat back. The evidence was circumstantial, but together, it painted a picture. Ryan was siphoning money, possibly preparing for something Ethan couldn't see yet, maybe even a buyout or a hostile takeover. He thought about calling their corporate attorney, but the idea made him feel sick. That would mean admitting, out loud, that the man he'd trusted most was betraying him. The next morning, Ethan called Mia into his office. She looked nervous as she sat down across from him. Mia, he said gently, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest. Of course. These payments to Altura Consulting, did you process them? Her eyes flicked down. Ryan approved those invoices. And he never asked me to review them? No, she whispered. I assumed you knew. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Mia's face was stricken. Is something wrong? He forced a steadier tone. I'm not sure yet, but I appreciate your honesty. She nodded, stood, and left the room. He knew word would spread, but at this point, he didn't care. That afternoon, Derek Kim knocked softly. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Ethan, I don't know if I should be telling you this, Derek began, but I think you deserve to know. Ryan's been meeting with Apex Venture Partners without you. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. Apex, he echoed. They passed on Series B. Yeah, Derek said, voice low. But they're interested in funding a pivot, one that doesn't include you. Ethan stared at him, unable to process the words. Derek continued, they think Ryan is the brand, that he's the visionary. He's been telling them you'd be stepping away voluntarily. The room seemed to go gray around the edges. How long have you known? A few weeks, Derek admitted. I thought maybe it was just exploratory. But now, I don't know. Ethan nodded numbly. Thank you for telling me. After Derek left, Ethan sat perfectly still. He felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything inside him. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. That evening, Ethan drove to his favorite spot on the edge of Lake Austin, a small, rocky overlook where he used to sit and sketch ideas when Catalyst was just a dream. He watched the sun sink behind the hills, the last golden light shimmering on the water. He thought about the night he and Ryan had sat here, scribbling their first pitch deck on the backs of napkins. They'd been so sure, so certain they were different, that no amount of money or pressure could ever corrupt what they had. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to summon that feeling again. But all he felt was grief. The next morning, Ethan came to the office early. He sat in Ryan's chair at the conference table, waiting. When Ryan walked in, he looked startled to see Ethan there, the lights already on. "We need to talk," Ethan said. Ryan set his bag down carefully. "I assume you've been digging. I know about Apex. I know about the payments to Altura." Ryan's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Ethan, don't lie to me." Ryan sank into the chair opposite him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You are never going to tell me," Ethan said finally, his voice raw. "You are going to cut me out." Ryan rubbed his eyes. "I tried to protect you from this. You're not built for what Catalyst needs next." Ethan let out a hoarse laugh. "Protect me? You think I need protecting from the company I built with you?" "It's not personal," Ryan said softly. "That's the problem," Ethan snapped. "For me, it was always personal." Ryan looked up, his expression weary. "You can fight me if you want, but you'll lose." Ethan stared at him, the man he'd once called his brother, the man who'd stood by him in the hardest moments of his life. And in that moment, something inside Ethan went cold and clear. "I'm not going to lose," he said quietly. "You don't get to decide that." Over the next week, the tension at Catalyst Innovations became impossible to ignore. Rumors spread like wildfire that Ethan and Ryan were in open conflict, that the company was about to implode, that investors were already choosing sides. Some employees avoided Ethan altogether. Others quietly closed his office door behind them, offering whatever scraps of information they could. He began building his own case, collecting records, contracts, and emails. Every night, he stayed until the building was empty, documenting every decision Ryan had made without him. He wasn't ready to confront Apex yet, but he was preparing. One evening, as he was leaving, Mia caught up to him in the parking garage. "Ethan," she said urgently, "I thought you should know. Ryan scheduled a board meeting for next week. He's planning to propose a transition plan." Ethan's throat tightened. "A transition plan? He's going to try to have you removed as COO." Ethan nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mia." As she walked away, he leaned against the car door, the metal cold against his back. For the first time, he understood exactly what he was up against. And he knew he had to fight. Ethan Parker had always believed in measured action. He'd never been impulsive, never the type to make decisions without first analyzing every angle. But in the days after learning Ryan's plan to push him out, he discovered something new in himself, something sharp and unyielding. He was done trying to protect a friendship that no longer existed. On Monday morning, he drove to the office before sunrise. The city was still sleeping, the streets quiet under the pink glow of the coming dawn. As he turned into the Catalyst parking lot, he forced himself to breathe slowly. He was about to set something in motion he couldn't take back. Inside, the building was dark. He made his way to his office and unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, pulling out a slim folder marked confidential. For weeks, he'd been collecting evidence, screenshots of financial transfers, flagged emails, contracts signed without his countersignature. Each page was a piece of the puzzle proving that Ryan had breached their operating agreement and violated multiple fiduciary duties. He laid the folder on his desk and sat in the quiet, waiting for the courage to pick up the phone. When the clock hit 7:15 a.m., he dialed the number of Andrea Walsh, Catalyst's longtime corporate attorney. Her sleepy voice answered on the second ring. "Ethan? Everything okay?" "I'm sorry to call so early," he said, his voice rough. "I need to meet today. It's urgent." A beat of silence. "I'll clear my morning. Come by at 9. When he hung up, he rested his forehead in his hands. This was real. There would be no going back. At 9 o'clock sharp, Ethan sat across from Andrea in her glass-walled office, the folder between them. Andrea was a tall woman in her 50s, with a calm, no-nonsense demeanor. She flipped through the pages in silence, her brow furrowing deeper with each document. Finally, she looked up. "Ethan, how long have you been compiling this?" "Since I saw the first payment to Horizon Strategy Group." "And you're certain the board hasn't approved any of these arrangements?" "They haven't. Ryan made all these decisions unilaterally." Andrea closed the folder and steepled her hands. "You understand this will escalate quickly. If you challenge him, he'll respond in kind." Ethan nodded. "I know. He's likely already spoken to Apex Venture Partners about a buyout. They'll pressure the board to side with him." "That's why I'm here," Ethan said. "I'm not going to let him push me out of the company I built." Andrea studied him for a long moment.
All right.
"I'll prepare a cease and desist letter and a formal notice of breach. If he wants to fight, we'll be ready." As he left her office, Ethan felt a grim steadiness settle over him. He was done waiting for Ryan to do the right thing. The next day, Ryan arrived at Catalyst just before 10. Ethan was already in the conference room with Andrea, Mia, Derek, and 2 board members, Karen Patel and Joseph McMillan. As Ryan stepped inside, his smile faltered when he saw Andrea at the table. "What is this?" Ryan asked, his voice tight. Ethan didn't look away. "This is a formal notice of breach." Andrea slid the folder across the table. "We have documented evidence that you've engaged in unauthorized expenditures and concealed material information from your co-founder and the board." Ryan's face went pale, then flushed red. "You're out of your mind," he snapped. "Is it true you've been negotiating a deal with Apex to remove Ethan?" Andrea asked coolly. Ryan's jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. Karen Patel spoke next, her voice low. "Ryan, if you've been doing this behind the board's back, you've exposed the company to serious liability." Ryan glared at Ethan. "You really think you can win this?" Ethan held his gaze. "I don't think. I know." After the meeting, the board called an emergency session without Ryan and Ethan present. They deliberated for 3 tense hours while Ethan paced the hallway outside the glass conference room. Mia sat in a chair nearby, her hands clenched in her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered finally. "I should have come to you sooner." Ethan shook his head. "You weren't the one lying to everyone." They sat in silence until the door finally opened. Karen stepped out, her expression unreadable. "The board has agreed to suspend all restructuring proposals pending an independent audit," she said. "Ryan will remain CEO for now, but he's been instructed not to enter any new agreements without board approval." It wasn't the decisive victory Ethan had hoped for, but it was a start. That evening, Ethan drove home in a daze. He knew this was only the beginning. Ryan would not back down. Apex would not walk away quietly. And the employees, many of whom idolized Ryan, would have to pick sides. He stood in his kitchen, staring at the darkened skyline. He thought about the early years, when it was just the 2 of them against the world. He thought about the night Ryan called him the brother he'd never had. And he wondered if any of it had ever been real. The following week was a blur of lawyers, tense meetings, and whispered conversations in the hallways. Ethan tried to keep the company running as smoothly as possible, but morale was crumbling. Rumors spread faster than he could contain them. One afternoon, he caught Mia wiping tears from her eyes in the kitchenette. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" She shook her head. "Everyone's scared. They don't know who to trust." "I know. I don't want to leave," she whispered. "But I don't know how this ends." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Neither do I. But I'm not giving up." That night, Ethan stayed late again. He sat in the dark, watching the city lights shimmer across the lake. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should walk away before this gets uglier." He read it twice, feeling his pulse hammer in his throat. Then he set the phone aside. He wasn't walking away.
Not now.
Over the next several days, Ethan built a plan. He called old investors who still respected him, quietly rallying support. He spoke to attorneys about legal options. He compiled more evidence, documenting every instance where Ryan had violated their agreement. Each step felt like reclaiming a little piece of his power. On Thursday morning, he met with Karen and Joseph privately. "I know this is uncomfortable," Ethan said, "but I'm asking for your support. If Ryan stays in control, Catalyst will be gutted to serve Apex's agenda. Everything we've built will be sold off piece by piece." Karen sighed. "You understand this isn't just about loyalty to you. We have a duty to protect the company." "That's exactly what I'm trying to do." Joseph leaned forward. "If we were to consider a vote of no confidence, would you be willing to step into the CEO role?" Ethan swallowed. Yes. By Friday afternoon, Ryan knew Ethan was preparing to challenge him. He stormed into Ethan's office, slamming the door so hard the blinds rattled. "You think you can take this from me?" he demanded. Ethan stayed seated. "I'm not taking anything. I'm protecting it." "From me?" Ryan spat. "I made this company what it is." "We both did," Ethan said evenly. "But you're willing to destroy it to get your payday." Ryan's eyes blazed. "You think you can win? You're a coward hiding behind lawyers and board votes." Ethan stood slowly. "I'm not hiding, Ryan. I'm fighting. Because, unlike you, I still care what happens to this company and the people in it." For a moment, they just stared at each other. Ethan felt the final threads of their friendship snap, leaving nothing behind. When Ryan left, slamming the door behind him, Ethan felt oddly calm. He knew exactly what he had to do. Over the weekend, he finalized his plan. He met with the board's legal counsel, prepared the formal motion for a vote of no confidence, and outlined his vision for Catalyst's future. On Sunday night, he stood in his living room, surrounded by the evidence he'd gathered. He thought about the risks, lawsuits, public backlash, the possibility of losing everything. But he also thought about the people counting on him. The engineers who'd worked late nights, the interns who'd believed in the mission, the customers who relied on their products. He couldn't walk away. Monday morning arrived clear and cold. Ethan walked into the building with his head high. Employees watched him pass, their faces tight with uncertainty. He took the elevator to the top floor, heart pounding. When he stepped into the boardroom, Ryan was already there, seated at the head of the table. Ethan met his gaze. "This ends today," he said quietly. The boardroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Ethan stood at one end of the long table, his hands resting on a neat stack of folders, while Ryan sat at the other end, arms folded across his chest, gaze fixed somewhere over Ethan's shoulder. Karen Patel cleared her throat and addressed the room. "We are here today to consider a motion of no confidence in Ryan Carter as CEO of Catalyst Innovations. Mr. Parker has prepared a presentation outlining the reasons for this motion." Ethan nodded and took a steadying breath. His heart was beating so hard he could feel it in his palms. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Over the past 6 months," he began, "Ryan has repeatedly violated our operating agreement. He has made unilateral decisions without board approval, concealed material information from leadership, and engaged in financial transactions that were, at best, highly questionable." He clicked a remote, and the large display behind him came to life. The first slide was a ledger showing the payments to Altura Consulting and Horizon Strategy Group. "These payments total over $700,000, Ethan continued. "They were authorized solely by Ryan, with no disclosure to me or the board." Ryan didn't look up. His jaw worked silently as Ethan clicked to the next slide, emails between Ryan and Apex Venture Partners. "These emails demonstrate Ryan's intent to remove me from leadership and to restructure Catalyst in a way that would primarily benefit Apex. He assured them that I would voluntarily transition out, despite never having discussed that with me." Murmurs spread around the table. Joseph McMillan leaned forward, studying the documents. "Ryan, do you dispute the authenticity of these emails?" Ryan finally lifted his gaze. "I don't dispute them," he said flatly. "But I stand by every decision I've made. Ethan has been a drag on this company for years. He's too cautious, too stuck in the past to take us where we need to go." Ethan felt the words like a slap, but he didn't react. "This company exists because of both of us," he said evenly. "We built it together. But somewhere along the way, you decided it belonged only to you." Ryan let out a harsh laugh. "You never had the guts to lead. You were content to let me handle the hard decisions while you hid behind your spreadsheets. Ethan felt his temper flare, but he forced himself to stay calm. You call it hiding. I call it protecting what we built from people who see it only as a means to an end. Karen looked between them. Let's stay focused on the facts. Ryan, can you explain why these consulting firms were paid without disclosure? Ryan's lips thinned. They were necessary to secure strategic positioning. You wouldn't understand. I understand perfectly, Ethan said. He picked up one of the folders and slid it down the table to Karen. That is a forensic report prepared by an independent accountant. It shows that at least 2 of those firms were shell entities controlled by Ryan's cousin. For the first time, Ryan looked genuinely shaken. His eyes darted to Karen, then back to Ethan. You're lying. Ethan shook his head.
No.
I'm not. Karen opened the folder and began skimming the report. The other board members leaned in. The silence stretched, so heavy it felt like the walls were pressing inward. When Karen looked up, her expression was grim. This is serious. If this is accurate, it constitutes fraud. Ryan swallowed, his face pale. You don't get it, none of you. We needed an edge. We're surrounded by competitors ready to eat us alive. If we didn't play hardball. You mean if you didn't line your pockets? Ethan interrupted, voice tight. Ryan slammed his palm on the table. I did what I had to do to keep this company alive. No, Ethan said quietly. You did what you had to do to make yourself indispensable and rich. The tension peaked. No one spoke. Ethan knew this was the moment. He had to push it to a final decision. He looked around the table, meeting each board member's gaze in turn. Catalyst was built on trust. On the promise that we could do something meaningful without compromising our integrity. I'm not naive. I know this industry is brutal. But if we abandon every principle to survive, then what exactly are we fighting for? He paused, feeling the emotion tightening his throat. I'm not asking you to side with me because I was here first. I'm asking you to decide what kind of company you want Catalyst to be. No one moved. Ryan stared at him, his expression raw and full of hate. Finally, Karen spoke. I'm calling a vote. One by one, the board members voiced their decision. Joseph, aye. Karen, aye. 2 more votes followed, both aye. Ethan's heart was hammering so loud he could barely hear. Then Derek spoke, voice shaking.
Aye.
Ryan shot to his feet, chair scraping back with a screech. You think this is over? You have no idea what you've just done. He stormed out of the room, the door slamming so hard the glass rattled. The board sat in stunned silence. Karen finally turned to Ethan. Effective immediately, you will serve as interim CEO pending a formal appointment. We'll begin a comprehensive audit of all transactions. Ryan's access to company accounts is revoked. Ethan nodded slowly, the words barely sinking in. Thank you. Joseph leaned forward, voice low. I know this wasn't easy, but you did the right thing. Ethan swallowed hard. I hope so. After the meeting, Ethan walked back to his office. The hallway felt longer than it ever had before. Employees stood in clusters, whispering. Some looked at him with cautious respect, others with fear. He stepped inside, closed the door, and finally let out a shuddering breath. It was over, or at least this part was. Late that evening, he stood in the empty conference room, staring out at the skyline. The city looked the same as it had the day Catalyst was born, but everything else had changed. He thought about Ryan's last words. You have no idea what you've just done. Maybe Ryan was right. Maybe the fallout would be worse than Ethan could imagine. But for the first time in months, he felt a fragile sense of clarity. He had chosen the harder path, the one that might cost him everything. But at least he knew he hadn't compromised who he was. He turned away from the window and picked up the phone. Karen, he said when she answered. Let's get to work. The morning after the board meeting felt surreal. Ethan woke before dawn, his mind struggling to adjust to the reality that he was now the CEO of Catalyst Innovations. The title didn't feel like a victory. It felt like inheriting a battlefield, littered with the wreckage of everything he and Ryan had once believed in. He made coffee he couldn't taste and stood by the kitchen window as the sun climbed over the Austin skyline. His phone vibrated almost constantly, texts, emails, missed calls. Word had gotten out, as he knew it would. Some of the messages were cautiously supportive. Others were bluntly accusatory. "I can't believe you did this. You finally got what you wanted. Hope you're happy. If you need anything, I'm here." Each ping was a reminder that nothing would ever be the same. At 8 a.m., Ethan pulled into the Catalyst parking lot. For a moment, he sat behind the wheel, taking in the building he'd helped design. The brushed steel sign over the glass entrance read, "Catalyst Innovations, Imagine Better." He wondered if that slogan still meant anything. Inside, the atmosphere was brittle with tension. Conversations stopped when he walked past. A few people nodded. Others looked away. He tried to remind himself that none of this was personal. Not really. But that was a lie. It was all personal. He called a company-wide meeting in the main auditorium, knowing it would be the hardest speech of his life. The seats filled slowly. Some employees looked scared. Some looked angry. When the murmuring died down, Ethan stepped to the podium and took a deep breath. "I know the last few weeks have been confusing and painful," he began. "I wish there were an easy way to explain everything, but the truth is there isn't." He paused, letting the silence settle. "What I can tell you is this. Catalyst was founded on a simple idea, that we could build something extraordinary without sacrificing our integrity. That idea has been tested. And yes, some of us, including me, have failed at times to live up to it." He looked out over the rows of faces, searching for any flicker of understanding. "I won't pretend the decisions I've made were easy. Removing Ryan was not something I ever wanted. But it was necessary to protect this company and the people who make it what it is." A few heads nodded. Others stayed still. "In the coming weeks, we'll be conducting a thorough audit. We'll be as transparent as possible about what we find. And I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to rebuild your trust." He stepped back from the podium. No applause followed. Just a heavy, uncertain silence. After the meeting, Mia found him in the hallway. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "Doesn't feel that way." "It will." Ethan wanted to believe her, but the hurt in so many faces was hard to ignore. Over the next several days, the audit team worked around the clock. Ethan spent hours reviewing contracts, answering questions from nervous employees, and fielding calls from reporters. Catalyst's story was front-page news. Some headlines painted Ethan as a hero who saved the company from corruption. Others cast him as a backstabber who had destroyed a partnership for power. Late one night, he sat alone in his office, skimming an article that called him the quiet architect of a corporate coup. He closed his laptop, feeling hollow. He wondered what Ryan was doing, whether he was plotting revenge or simply licking his wounds. He wondered if they would ever speak again. 2 weeks after the vote, Ethan received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable.
R."
He read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it in his desk drawer. He wasn't afraid. He was tired. Slowly, the company began to stabilize. The audit confirmed Ryan's misconduct. Millions siphoned through shell companies, side deals with Apex, undisclosed kickbacks. Some employees were horrified. Others seemed unsurprised. Ethan met with each team, answering every question he could. He didn't sugarcoat the truth. He didn't pretend everything would be fine overnight. Some people quit anyway. He couldn't blame them. In the middle of all the chaos, something unexpected happened. One evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, he noticed a small group of engineers gathered around a whiteboard. They were debating a new product feature, arguing passionately over design specs. He stood there, unseen, watching them. For a moment, he felt a flicker of the old magic, the sense that Catalyst was still alive, still capable of building something meaningful. The following month, the board convened to formalize the leadership transition. Karen Patel stepped down as chair, nominating Joseph to take her place. As the final agenda item, Joseph turned to Ethan. "Ethan," he said, "the board recognizes your leadership during this crisis." Effective immediately, we are removing the interim designation. You are now the CEO of Catalyst Innovations. A quiet ripple of applause followed. Ethan sat very still, the words echoing in his mind. After everything, he'd come full circle, from co-founder to nearly ousted, to the one left standing. That evening, he drove to the old overlook by Lake Austin. The sky was streaked with purple and gold as the sun set over the water. He thought about the first time he'd come here with Ryan, two young men with nothing but ambition and blind faith. He wondered if Ryan ever thought about those nights, if any part of him regretted how it all ended. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the wind on his face. He didn't know what the future would hold. Maybe Ryan was right. Maybe this was only the beginning of a longer war. But for now, he felt something like peace. When he opened his eyes, the stars were just beginning to appear. He stood up, turned back toward his car, and began the drive home. Whatever came next, he would face it on his own terms. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready.